I began this project by creating the box that would house all the electrical for this whiskey smoker, which is essentially a vacuum chamber. So I cut the lid and then I made the box kind of around the top piece. It's just a square box, so I used just wood I had laying around and then later stained it. So I just cut the 4 pieces that would house the vacuum pump. And then here I go cutting out the holes for the electrical outlet and then the switch I mounted on the front to turn it on and off. So I just cut a pilot hole to let me get the saw in. Just essentially because you can see that square has to be cut out, but you can't cut from the edge or else you're gonna damage it. So you have to cut a hole and then you can cut through with the saw. This is using the jigsaw. So after I created that initial pilot hole on the drill press, I used the saw to kind of hollow out the square that I was using for the electrical outlet. So I used this spare piece of tubing it just had a plate at the end and it had a hole, so it kind of covered up or made like a nicer exit for the electrical cord to plug it in. I used the drill to pilot out some holes for the nails, just because if I was hitting the nail in, it just wouldn't go the direction I wanted. They didn't go in straight because I was kind of coming at an angle, like a 45, so just putting those pilots helped a lot, and then I was able to get the 90 degrees everywhere you can see. It was pretty much all 90 degrees because you have 4 sides. So I used a clamp and then some pieces of wood to make a jig to hold the wood in 90 degrees while I hammered in the nails. Otherwise, they would be at a slant for sure. So this is a good method for sure. I enjoyed making this little box because I've made tables and then like desks and furniture, but just making like a little box was pretty challenging because, I wanted to make it nice because I'm like, this should be easy. But once I was doing it, I was like, damn, this really put me to the test here. And I made it look nice, so I was proud of it just because I didn't want to make, lopsided or like uneven lines. But it was harder than I was anticipating. I was just making it all pretty. Most of this thing was just making the box, the like actual electrical components. Pretty easy, I just kind of mounted this vacuum pump to the lid, and then I built a box around it just to house it to make it look nice, or else it just looked like a science experiment. So this is how you go from a crazy idea to practical application. And then I added some little supports just on the edges because it was vibrating a lot, which kind of like shook the box apart. So a little bit of reinforcement, just putting these wood pieces on the edges on the lid to hold up those walls. And you can see that box coming together. I liked it without the stain, but it'll just, like, say you get water something on it, it's gonna stain the wood, so you always have to put stain. But here's a little bit of reinforcement, just making sure I didn't come through to the top, using the correct length screws. I used nails just because they had the least amount of profile, so like if I hit nails on the outside you can barely see them, but if I use screws they'd be pretty obvious. And this didn't have it didn't need a lot of support, so just nailed it together. But I did use those little wood pieces on the top of the box to hold it together. So I used a lot of little tricks to hold it together, make it look aesthetic by, not having screws hanging out of it, which is most of product design. Like, look at a vacuum. You just gotta make it look, sleek and nice, and then all the electrical is tucked away. So the idea is just selling the product. So that's what I made it, hide all the magic. So it's pretty simple, but people think it's so complicated because they can't see what's going on inside. So you just hide all that electrical and it looks more complicated than it really is. And that's how it also ends up a good gift. But then the next step was just staining it, so it looked good there raw, but we did need to stain it so it didn't develop stains from just use. Like if you spill water on it, it's just kind of a water stain. So this protects the wood from rotting, and it gives it a nice color. Like raw wood's much nicer, but this kind of gives it that more vintage whiskey look for sure. So it's nice. It's for my dad, so he probably likes this aesthetic. So what you do is tuck away all the electrical. So that's what this box is for, is to hide the vacuum pump. And then I just splice the wires from that to hook it up to the switch, because the pump you pretty much just plug in, it turns on, it doesn't have a switch. So here's just a little bit of electrical, not really explained, but there's the cord to plug it into the wall, and then there's a little shroud, so when you see it from the outside, it looks so nice because, you know, there's a little thing it's coming out of rather than just cutting a hole in the wood, and then you have that wire sticking out. This looks like it was well designed. So then I just added some screws holding in, but it still matched the aesthetic. I used self-tapping screws, but unfortunately it was just not working out. So I pre-drilled the holes. Also just for alignment, it helps. You can see the size of those screws and how they stuck out, but they had like this nice little bronze nub at the end, so it looked nice from the outside, and we were hiding all of that electrical, so it didn't matter. And if you care, you can cut the ends off those screws, but it doesn't matter. Anyways, I cut the plug that goes into the wall, and then with that I attached it to the switch, and then also that vacuum pump. I don't know if I showed it all, but it's pretty straightforward electrical. You pretty much just like wire the outlet to the pump, and then in the middle of either the ground or the power, you can add the switch. So how it works is once the switch is on, it lets the power through. But once the switch is off, it acts as like a door. So it just shuts or like disconnects the power. If you don't know anything about electrical, it's pretty straightforward. It's pretty much just like, it's like a bridge, like, you know, those bridges in like England that open and shut for boats. So once the switch is on, the bridge is down, traffic can flow, or like electricity. But if the bridge is up, it cuts so that traffic cannot go over the bridge. Very straightforward. I didn't actually know that. I didn't know how switches worked. I had to learn that. And if you didn't take engineering, you probably wouldn't have learned that. So I thought it was neat. But yeah, it's pretty straightforward. It looks more complicated than it really is, but it works. After that, you just cover all the electrical with tape so that they don't hit each other and create sparks. And then I put a plate on the bottom, but I just picked up some sawdust off the ground, threw it on top, and then used the lighter to ignite it. And then the vacuum pump will, like, once there's a little bit of smoke going, it'll just suck it right down in there. And it's like hitting a cigarette pretty much. Like once you pull it, the ash ignites and you're pulling the smoke in. So it's just that. It's just a smoke chamber. Smoked fucking whiskey. Right?